Well, hello, Bluegrass fans, and welcome to the Leadership Bluegrass Online, Navigating the Digital Jungle. My name is Jeff West-Taranen, and I am the Leadership Bluegrass Program Facilitator, Class of 2015, in case you're interested. Leadership Bluegrass is the International Bluegrass Music Association's annual intensive professional development program building leaders across all areas of bluegrass music. In place of an in-person program, this year, we are sharing a taste of Leadership Bluegrass with the entire community through a webinar series taking place Thursdays throughout March. Each week will also feature a set from an international bluegrass band. This time it's a bluegrass band from Germany. You're going to enjoy that. Support Leadership Bluegrass and other IBMA programs by donating or becoming an IBMA member today. Visit ibma.org for more information. Moderating today's discussion on the business of education is the Leadership Bluegrass Class of 2020 graduate, Ben Wright. Boy, I'm looking forward to this one. This is going to be a great discussion that Ben is going to lead for us. Ben is a professional banjo player, teaching artist, and online programming and promotions expert. He has been playing bluegrass for over 20 years and is a founding member of the internationally touring bluegrass band Henhouse Prowlers and their nonprofit bluegrass ambassadors. Check them out if you haven't seen them. They're really great. Based on his success in programming with both music and education, Ben was recruited in October of 2020 to be the virtual programming director for American Voices, the nonprofit organization that administers cultural diplomacy work for the U.S. State Department. Very important stuff. Let me turn it around to Ben, and here he is, Ben Wright.
Thanks, Jeff. We'll kick it back to you at the end of this. So we brought four really diverse, people from very different parts of the music education world in today, and I think you're going to get some pretty cool perspectives from various different people with different experiences using teaching to enhance their careers. And so I'm going to get started here. As Jeff so kindly introduced me, my name is Ben Wright. I play banjo in the Henhouse Prowlers, and we've been a band for about 16 years, and we tour pretty extensively. And I realized about 10 years ago that, and as many people will realize if they tour at all, that Monday through Wednesday are not good days to be touring. Shows just don't make the kind of money that you're used to on the weekend, and it ends up being dead time. And we started filling up some of those days with teaching, and it really has kind of enhanced our entire existence as a band. I've definitely had people join the band over the years who thought at first that teaching wasn't for them. But I'm a firm believer in teaching kind of being for everyone. And we all kind of learn from each other in the band on how to teach. And so, it's how did we get into making that a part of what we do? We definitely just kind of started talking to people about it and making it clear to our fans and our community that it was something we were interested in doing. We actually got invited real early on to do like a month-long program in schools in Evanston, Illinois. And that was something we were nervous about, but we got, through experience, we kind of got better at it. And over the years, we've actually developed programming. We're pretty conscious about building solid programming and going in prepared to schools to work with students. And we even started a nonprofit called Bluegrass Ambassadors. A lot of what we do is based on the musical diplomacy work that we've been involved in for the past 10 years. But I'd say easily half of the teaching we do is simply going into schools and setting an example for young people as to what it looks like for an artist to make a career out of what they do. We go in and we talk about bluegrass music and then show kids that we're a professional band that makes a living making music. And that inspires young people just to see that as a very realistic goal, that's something they can shoot for, that's not necessarily based on the American Idol version of becoming a successful musician. And so it's been really an incredible thing for us to make part of what we do. And you can check out bluegrassambassadors.org, our website for the nonprofit, to see how we do that online, like how we actually have some examples of programming so that teachers can look over it and decide what kind of school programming they might want us to bring to their schools. And then we communicate through them through the website and build programming, anything from visiting one class to an entire week of the band coming into a school and talking about bluegrass music, musical diplomacy, all the different things that apply specifically to our band. And I firmly believe that every band that's out there is capable of doing this kind of thing if they put their mind to it. And the reality is it helps make ends meet for the band too, because those Monday through Wednesday or Thursday days just don't make a lot of money, and end up being days that often you spend money rather than making any. I will say that, school programming can be exhausting, and it is something that bands should be paid to do. And I think, and there are a lot of resources out there and grants for that kind of thing. And oftentimes we will pair up with a school and apply for grants together. And that helps the school pay for the programming. And we also, through our nonprofit, raise money to help schools pay for us to come to them too. So it really depends on the school we're going to and their funding budget. So that's kind of my spiel about what I do. I'm sure we'll discuss a lot more about those kinds of things as we move forward. I'm going to pass this on to Annie Savage, a really wonderful fiddle player who does incredible things in school. I'm looking at her bio here, and I love her motto, which is total world domination through vibrating wooden boxes. And so Annie, tell us about what you do. And I know it's a little loosely connected to what we do, just kind of on the other end of things, please.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you guys. And I do have to say congratulations, class of 2020, second only to class of 2016, the greatest class of all time. But anyway, I love being here. And a lot of what I will offer is very similar territory to what Ben just discussed, but almost from the perspective of the education or the teacher in the classroom that is waiting for a wonderful bluegrass band who will show up and help to do what I think is one of the most critical areas in public education right now, especially with music, and that's narrow the gap between the music classroom and the music industry, because that's something that all teachers are tracking on. And one of the great things I love about what you guys do, Ben, is that it does this with cultural equity and culturally responsive learning, because that's the one thing that as bluegrass artists, we have to make sure that we are addressing all the learners in the environment that we may find ourselves in, and not just communicating yet another kind of Eurocentric music. Because in public education right now, I would say the second most important issue is providing our learners with experiences that are culturally relevant to them, not to the person who's teaching, but to the student themselves. So one little secret that I have, and I'm going to give it out, and if anybody's interested in it, for years, when we go to IBMA, the trick is, how do you monetize your IBMA experience when you're showcasing your band? And I have a contact in the Raleigh Public Schools who books us at $175 a head to come in and provide a culturally relevant experience for their very diverse student base. So they're looking for bluegrass artists specifically that can spin their work in bluegrass and old time in a way that works for kids of all different races, socioeconomic status, and background, because those are the kids that we find ourselves in front of. So my biggest tip is to expand what you do. and I'm sure Evie will discuss this as well, to not only incorporate the traditional aspects, but figure out a way to reach the learners, and you will be invited into public schools. 38 out of all 50 states have public school orchestra programs. An orchestra is always looking for a way to create validity for their students. I'm an orchestra director, and I have a marching band cohort and a show choir cohort. But for me to provide something as an orchestra teacher that really fires up my kids, uses improvisation, encourages them to play by ear, and connects their work to the working music industry, that's a very attractive way for a lot of orchestra teachers to connect the dots. And I think my overall message to anyone out there, whether you're a teacher or performer or events producer, is try to connect the dots, create unlikely relationships, look at the needs that are there in your community or are there on the road that you're touring, in the communities that you tour in, and try to connect the dots to serve the interest of the local amateur musicians and student base, because everybody loves music. And we live in a world that wants to commodify this. And it's a falsehood. Music is not meant for just those of us that have studied our whole lives and given up everything that we had to do it. Music is in the hearts of all humans. And so we want to reach as many of those people as possible. This took me, currently I'm writing a dissertation and working on my PhD, because the string educator community or orchestra teaching community is in a crisis. And so they took me, someone who had jamming experience and reasonably academic, but not over the top by any means. I mean, my statistics teacher could tell you horror stories about my math skills, but they needed someone like me to come in and be a teacher trainer, so that we're churning out orchestra teachers that do the two things that I'm talking about, which is create cultural equity and connect to the music industry. So anybody who's out there right now kind of like, wow, I don't know if I'm able to go back on the road. The other thing that you might consider is going into a music education program, because they are looking for people who have your skill set. You can go in and, as a band, contact your local school district, become a visiting artist, either at the general kind of elementary school level with lessons like Steady Beat. I know I'm speaking Evie's language, because I invited Evie and her husband to come in and teach math through movement. And they do this through a pretty Afrocentric lens, and it blew my kids away. And we were bringing in kids from all different classes. So you can teach lessons to orchestra students. If you deal with that, you need to know that they are used to reading notation. So any kind of skill set that you have that allows you to walk in and give them notation is going to make the school teacher a little bit happier than trying to kind of bridge the gap. And again, I'll end with, if you want to see a sample of what I've done as kind of a 20-year public educator and 35-year touring musician, I have a very culturally relevant music industry, literacy oriented site that I use with my public schools, where I bring my band in, and it's at free-strings.com. And that will tell you everything you need to know. And you can also find me at savagefiddler.com, and my band, the Savage Hearts, always going out. For us, it started as we just wanted to do the ethical thing, which was not staying up all night, just partying like college students when we were on the road. It was like, we're coming in here as professionals. We're going to get up early in the morning. We're going to get our coffee, and we're going to go make $1,500 today before we ever even play the show. So I encourage anybody to reach out to me at savagefiddler.com if you have any questions, or if you want my super secret tip. Who is the person that's going to pay you $175 a show at IBMA?
Thanks, Annie. That you just hit a bunch of points that I 1,000% agree with, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about it. We're going to move it over to Dave Howard, who I originally knew as the mandolin player in the 23 string band, who I loved that band. But now Dave's the director of the Louisville Folk School. And I think the next two speakers here, Dave and Evie, are going to be able to talk about even more stuff outside of even going into school. So Dave, please share with us your experiences.
Thank you. Thank you for introducing me. And I can't wait to learn more about what Ben and Annie just told us about. So I'm going to share my screen. I put together a really goofy little presentation for you guys here. Okay. So, like everybody else, I've been cooking a lot over the last year, and they had a recipe template on the slide presentation. So I just thought I'd roll with that. It looked tasty. So, I am currently running the Louisville Folk School. I'm managing about 15 different instructors that teach 32 weekly courses plus private lessons. Um, I've been programming and managing the folk school for about 6 years. When I founded it, we are a 501c3 not-for-profit. As Ben said, I used to tour with the 23 string band and was really looking for something that I could do closer to home that would keep me engaged with this music that I love and potentially move towards a career that doesn't involve being in a van all the time. So, our mission at the folk school is to engage the folk music traditions of Kentuckians through education and performance, build on the rich cultural history of the bluegrass state while creating community through the arts. And I can't tell, what slide are we on now? The folk school slide? There we go. So we teach guitar, banjo, mandolin, fiddle, bass, sometimes dulcimer, ukulele, auto harp, singing classes, ensemble classes, repertoire classes, jamming classes, mostly to adults and teens, both beginners and intermediate, some more advanced stuff. I've had a great time teaching Wernick method, bluegrass jamming stuff. Pete's a great educator and mentor. If you like teaching all instruments at all levels, that's your jam right there. Well, not long after Leadership Bluegrass 2020, the best class ever, our model for teaching classes in person obviously had to pivot, and we've been mostly teaching all these classes on Zoom since then. Unfortunately, we can't teach ensembles or jamming online. The technology is not really there to do that very well. So the latency just doesn't allow for more than one person to be unmuted at a time. So the singing classes haven't really been working, and none of those ensembles have worked out for us online. But the silver lining for us is we've been able to grow our student base, because instead of just students around Louisville, we now have students across the United States as well as Canada and Europe. So that's been nice. But I wanted to share with you some tips for teaching online. And if you're already teaching online, I have a feeling that this will all be old hat to you, as this would have been more timely about a year ago when we were trying to establish all these best practices. But I'm going to start with these basics, and there should be plenty of time if anyone has any questions or anything specific that they think that I can help them with. But to start, the best practices for teaching online are very similar to best practices for live streaming. I have a screenshot that just happened to be on my computer of Chris here, who is a Leadership Bluegrass graduate and has also taught some folk school classes. So best practices for teaching online are similar to a live stream. You want to find a quiet and well-lit space. Try to avoid backlit spaces. You can put a lamp right up close to you if you need to. I have a chandelier in my 100-year-old house, and I just changed out one of the bulbs to be like a brighter, softer light, and that works pretty well. But don't be afraid to just grab some lamps. They need to be able to see what you are doing. I highly recommend connecting your computer to the internet with an Ethernet cable instead of Wi-Fi, without getting into a lot of technical details involving packet rates and jitter. A wired connection is going to perform so much better and more reliably than a Wi-Fi connection will. Wi-Fi is going to just create more latency and more problems. And to be clear, you can't solve that problem with more bandwidth from your internet service provider. It's not about bandwidth. You really only need about 5 megabits per second for a good Zoom meeting, but connecting with your Ethernet cable is going to help a lot. If you have an audio interface and a microphone to use, that's going to sound a lot better than the internal mic on your computer. For what I'm doing here today, I have just the internal mic for my computer. I think it's probably sufficient. But if you're playing an instrument, you're going to take about $10,000 off of the sound of your instrument by playing through the internal mic on your computer. I don't know. Try it. If you've got an internal mic that works fine, that's great. But if you already have an audio interface and a microphone, you should probably be using that. This will be obvious if you've tried this, but you're going to have to mute the students while they're playing along with you, because it just turns into cacophony if there's more than one mic going, right? And this is an important one. If you're teaching on Zoom, you're going to want to optimize your settings, your audio settings. They have a high fidelity music mode now, which is fantastic. And then you need to enable original sound. So those are all important things to, just super basic stuff for getting your online teaching to where it works well. I think striving for excellence is always the way to go. I think the most important thing is like having empathy for your students. I think that's probably more important than a good internet connection. Especially if you're teaching adult beginners who are often perpetually playing at a remedial level. Having patience and empathy for your students is just going to be like an essential thing. So I think that's probably the most important. Here, I see there's something in the chat. I've not tried the new app for collaborative teaching. I'd love to hear more about that. Maybe I should turn it on to Evie, because I know a lot of what Evie and I would probably say overlap. We have like the same values with teaching, and I'd love to hear what Evie has to contribute.
Yeah, and just a reminder, this is being streamed out to Facebook, and please feel free to ask questions. They're getting fed to us through Zoom, and we'll try to get to them. But Evie, can I give a quick introduction of you? I'm just going to read your bio because it's concise and pretty cool. The polyrhythmic heat of Evie Ladin's clawhammer, banjo, resonant voice, real stories, and rhythmic dance have been heard from A Prairie Home Companion to Lincoln Center, Celtic Connections to Hardly Strictly Bluegrass, Brazil to Bali. A prolific creator and gracious facilitator, Evie grew up steeped in traditional folk music and dance up and down the East Coast, bringing a syncretic vision to new work while holding fast to the roots. She's won ribbons and arts fellowships, performed in sold-out concert halls and cozy living rooms, and toured around the world to every state in the US except Florida. And so I just wanted to read that because I think it really puts you in a light of being somebody who knows what they're talking about, and I can't wait to hear what you say. So please share with us some tips.
Thank you. I've been playing banjo since I was a kid, and also dancing, clogging, and all of that, following the Greengrass Cloggers. And I started my career as an artist, as a performing artist, as a dancer, as a percussive dancer. And so if you think touring as a musician can be difficult, as a dancer, it is even harder. And so most dance companies have an educational platform. And so from the get-go, I was doing assemblies in schools and all of that, and having this interactiveness. And then growing up as a musician and a dancer, my mother was an international folk dance leader. And so just the idea of engaging people in what you're doing, and then also growing up playing old time music, which is all about participation. People joke that old time music isn't really a performative style, but it's really meant for doing and for dancing to and all of that. And that's just been so much a part of my ethos. And then also early on, really realizing the black and brown and white roots of this music. It's the first syncretic music in the country. And I learned early on that having music and dance as part of your social communication was unusual in Western countries, but very typical throughout traditional cultures since the dawn of time. And so that just became a real part of my functionality as a performer. I love performing, but as Ben was saying, in the touring life, having those educational gigs as you're going along, not only is more lucrative, but to me, it's incredibly satisfying because you see this huge range of population, not just people consuming, but also encouraging people to participate. And I feel like that facilitation has become a big part of my reason for doing what I do. When I was first moved out to California, I joined my partner's group Crosspulse, which is a quintet of artists whose arts all come from the African diaspora, North and South America. And so we did, my first few months in California, did 150 school shows throughout the San Francisco Bay Area. It's how I learned the area, but also being able to present Appalachian music in a very funky context that really communicated to urban audiences. And that also is really satisfying. I've been talking about the banjo being from Africa for the entirety of my career and really pushing this sort of multicultural understanding of bluegrass and old time music, which I think is really important. And it's been so gratifying to see that exploding during this time. But to move on ahead to what I'm doing now, I am really fortunate to be a Peghead Nations artist, teaching artist, with this subscription service, and I have over 350 students on that, and that's been really helping support me during this time, as well as live group classes, similar to what Dave's doing at the Louisville Folk School through the Freight and Salvage in Berkeley, and also Silver Linings, having students from all over, or people who regularly can't make it to the Freight and Salvage, and being able to learn all together. And I just wanted to speak some to the effectiveness piece of it. As Dave mentioned, just working with adult populations, somehow in Western civilization, and Annie mentioned this too, we think that you have to be a professional in order to do something. I had an adult in a singing workshop say, "What if you can't sing?" And I said, that's not a thing. All people sing, they dance, they play music, and they should be doing it together. And part of the health of a community is participating in this common pulse. This, not because you're becoming a professional, but because doing art making in any form is a part of being a healthy person and contributing to a healthy community. So whether it's square dance calling, whether it's going into schools, whether it's performing and getting people to sing along, I really love engaging people to participate. And I'm curious, after this year of being separated, some people are going to be really hungry for it, and some people are going to be more comfortable being separated. And yet, with that in mind, we didn't used to teach online workshops like this. Now I have a third Sunday sing-along that draws people from all over. It is definitely one way. I'm in silence, they harmonize with me, etc. But just encouraging people to really get together and do this. And yet something that Dave mentioned, adults tend to be, if they haven't, they feel like they have to be really proficient already before they even start learning. And I think it's really important as to be an effective teacher that you continue encouraging people to participate. I have people from different levels in most of my classes, even with having a leveled class, there are always going to be people who are comfortable with different aspects of it. But have these people go halftime and these people go at tempo. But I always encourage people to keep moving, keep playing. And in that, it's a much more traditional way of engaging people. So again, in Western culture, we think very linearly, like you have to know what you're doing before you do it. We use reading tablature or something like that as a learning tool, which is great for visual learners. And yet, on the other hand, in every traditional culture, including bluegrass and old time music, you really learn by doing. You learn by doing, being around it, um, hopefully by growing up around it with people making music around you and engaging with you. But really, anybody has an entry point. And I think that that's really, really important. And whether you're teaching kids or you're teaching adults, that you can enter at any level and have some level of participation. And that to build people's confidence, so that they will continue learning, is really important. I find that people come to me a lot saying they tried working with YouTube and getting frustrated. And something I find, not every performer is a good teacher, right? So part of being a performer, or if you're very educated in a music tradition, is you often say, well, you just go like this. And the thing is, I can't go like that, you know, and I need you to go really, really slowly. That slow down function on YouTube videos, on any videos, are so great. Even for teaching videos, I have to, if I'm learning something, I often have to slow something down, or especially if I'm learning a fiddle tune, I slow it down to 25% to really get the nuances of it, and then you increase it slowly. So going back to the traditional way of learning, that I think of it as more circular than linear. So it's like, if anyone who plays old time music knows, you know, I jump into a tune I've never heard before. You get the big picture of it, and then you get your instruments in tune, you're playing in time, and then you start filling in the details as you get closer and closer. And kind of a funny thing about it is that often, as soon as you feel like you've really got it, they call last time. I don't know why that is true, but for some reason that seems to be pretty common. I really encourage people to develop their ear, because in this music tradition, nobody puts sheet music in front of you, and very rarely a chart, if you're sitting in a jam session. And I remember telling a student, you know, if you're in tune and you're playing in time, you can play in any jam session. And they said, is that really true? I was like, yeah, figure out the chord changes, recognize the chords on the guitar, whatever it is that you're playing, and just jump in, and your ear starts hearing the tune, and you start getting it. It's a much more circular way of going about it. And I've really enjoyed feedback over the years from students who had been really attached to tablature or notation, saying it was challenging, because I tell my students, just try this. I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing. Listen, try, And especially now on Zoom, I find that adults are more confident because nobody can hear them, except for the people in their houses. It's another silver lining, is that people feel like they can try things a little more than they even can live, because they're not worried about making mistakes. So just really encouraging participation as much as possible. And then sort of the last thing I'll talk about here is understanding that not everybody has the same context as you do. I use source recordings, which to some people's ears don't sound like the music they want to be playing, and they don't make that connection. Or I'm always encouraging people how to hear the music or participate in the music. And one student said, I don't want to play with anybody. I just want to play by myself on my porch. And realizing everyone has their own entry point. But I think the main thing is to be as accessible as possible, because part of the subtitle of this was effectiveness and profitability. And I think part of the profitability, as Ben and Annie both noticed, is being really diverse in what you consider your music career. You know, you either do one thing really, really well, or you can do a lot of things very well. And especially in the industry, how it's going these days, being really diversified is really useful. And if anything this shutdown has shown me, is that's really helped support me through this year without having a regular gig, is just being able to touch base with people, and then also just meet people where they're at and bringing them in. We talk about this a lot with anti-racism efforts, is calling people into the conversation. It's the same thing with music. This is a community, and you really want to welcome people into it and encourage them to play as much as possible and they appreciate it so much.
That was fabulous, Evie. We have a question here from Brad Kolodner. He's asking, how do you facilitate the interactive / jamming component of bluegrass and old time music with virtual learning? Anybody want to tackle that?
I jumped in with words, but one thing that I've done is ask my students to submit recordings to me. And I know there's like a lag in time there, but using the chordal vocabulary and maybe even having like a visual, we took an MP3 play along tracks and at the free strings method, and we created YouTube links out of those for many of the reasons that Evie brought up. You can change the tempo, and then you can kind of use the cursor feature to just nail exactly what you're trying to learn. And we use the old sing-along bouncing ball effect where the chord lights up. And then asked students to send their like breaks to me. And then I would like maybe make comments, and we had this kind of shared dialogue. So I think for anybody, as Dave mentioned, Wernick method instruction is another great, like you want to change your income structure and your happiness level as a performer, check out maybe being certified as a Wernick method teacher. That's a great way to just learn how to teach these kinds of things. But the break is always the thing that people just really, they're like, I'm fine to sit and strum, but I'm not comfortable taking a solo. They kind of like fixate on that. And so one way to get around that is to just have them send, they don't have to do it in front of everybody else, but they can send you the break kind of in the context of the chords. Those are just a couple tips for me. I'm sure other people have profound stuff. And hey, Brad, congratulations on being elected to the IBMA board, by the way.
I'll just add, I've been doing a sing along, providing lyrics and chords for people, and I'll sing I'll encourage them to sing melody, and I sing a harmony along with them. Old time music is not as focused on breaks and instrumentals, which is a great place for people who really just want to participate in the groove, is to play tunes like that and songs like that. But I also do ask people, does anyone want to take an instrumental? And then there's like the pause, unmute, and then they go and just play it, and it's fine, and it's a very supportive atmosphere. I think that's the main thing. And then, I'll also mention that Brad is also hosts the Baltimore Old Time Slow Jam, which I've been woodshedding my flat picking guitar, and I'll go to the slow jam and play fiddle tunes on guitar. But that also is great to have. There's a whole bunch of slow jam resources that have surfaced that I've been collecting, and I feed to my students so they can play along now with people all over the place.
Dave?
Yeah, we do some similar stuff. So like a fiddle teacher, obviously in the hour-long class, they're going through section by section, teaching the fiddle tune. And then they also send, usually like, depends on the teacher, but often like 3 different tempos of playing the tune. But then also sending a backup track of just them playing guitar, so that they can play along with and hear what it sounds like to play along with someone playing the chords to the tune. That way it kind of feels like you're jamming with someone. The interactive part of it, Brad, that's really tough to do. There is a software called Jamzam. I don't know if anybody's heard of this. I have some friends that have used it, but it's definitely still kind of in that startup phase of reliability being kind of questionable. But I think there's some excellent potential there. You do have to plug in your computer with an Ethernet cable and use the interface and all that stuff. But once you get that, I've heard pretty good things about it. It's just not super reliable. So, we at the folk school haven't tried using that for teaching classes. There's a cost associated with it as well. So, I mean, it could maybe in the future be like a premium class where you pay a little extra so that you're playing along with people or whatever. But then, then you have the extra like tech requirements that could. We're trying to make things more accessible for people in general, and so I kind of have some weird feelings about making things more expensive, and there's like this huge investment and everything. Like those are barriers that we're not really trying to support necessarily, but I think there is some good potential with that. And Abby had asked a question about had anyone tried using the app Collab for teaching? So I'm not familiar with that. Is anybody on the panel familiar with that? No, to look into it.
No, I have to admit that once I got my tech set up with Zoom and being able, to Zoom and FaceTime, and it works pretty darn well. That's kind of as far as I'm willing to take it. But in terms of, sort of the training, something I generally do in my teaching, I don't know if this seems mean, but I teach, I feel like there's no one way of playing this traditional music. And so I'll teach people by ear a general way. I'll teach them some techniques for embellishments. I'll teach them a version. And then if I give tablature, it's often a different tablature. So it's going to be a slightly different approach to it. And it can be frustrating at first, but especially for adults that stick with it, it helps them realize that, oh, well, we have to listen to the tune and really kind of listen to the nuances of the people they're playing with. And so that's sort of one of the ways that I encourage that practice, is by having different versions to work with.
We've got some good questions here coming in. Other than Zoom and Skype, do you recommend any other software or apps to use for online teaching?
I think we were just talking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, one of the resources to look for can be found in the associations, rather than like framing that as potentially an app. Maybe look at some of the bluegrass associations and what their offerings are. I know like Blueberry Festival up in Canada was doing a series with, I think, for me, outside of the apps, and I use Canvas as a school teacher, and I would echo Evie that YouTube and Zoom are pretty slick, and they're awfully accessible, and they're only getting better. But the associations are doing some interesting things to stay afloat as well. Like there's an events production side of that. And I want to just use this question as a pivot to allow some shout outs for Wintergrass Festival and the way that they've used the storytelling piece of Pocket Grass. Check out Pocket Grass. The California Bluegrass Association did a really cool, like talk about getting at the heart of diversity and international offering. They did a play around the clock, kind of like where
Jamathon.
48 hours of Jamathon. And so like outside of just the nuts and bolts of how to teach online, there's also this big picture. How are people monetizing this? And then if you want to win the 2022 Nobel Prize, just somebody please solve the latency issue out there. Because clearly it'll be done, I'm sure, somehow. And that person is going to be, they're just going to take the cash and prizes right off the table. And
I do know people who are using Jamkazam and Jamulus really successfully to do that, to have rehearsals and all that. But it does, like Dave was saying, have a higher level of tech. And you really have to have your tech together. So it's not the easiest entry point.
Yeah. There's also the possibility of holding outdoor jams. Like let's potentially talk about, as the weather gets warmer, and bringing education. I wouldn't feel comfortable walking into a 5,000 person festival right now. There's no way I would, but I might show up at a campground and sit in a circle of 10 people and walk in and jam and walk out.
Yeah, I've done some experimenting with the Jamkazam and software and stuff. You need a exceptionally good internet connection, and you really need to be as close as possible physically to the people. Like it has to be less than 500 miles. and 300 or 200 or even less is much more ideal. So it's too new to be universally usable, I think. Someone asked if we know people or any of us ourselves use Patreon for sharing lessons, videos, and transcriptions. I know Gina Furtado does a wonderful job of that. If you check her stuff out, she puts some free tastes online, and then you can subscribe to her Patreon and get like frequent lessons. It's pretty amazing.
I don't have a Patreon. I kind of decided early on that since the platforms I was using was working, I have a limit of self-promotion. So I think it's a great opportunity for a lot of people. Annie, do you have one?
I have one, and I helped kind of steer Greg Blake through some fundraising. And Greg was just named the new lead singer, Special Consensus, and has a heavy online teaching presence. Just an incredible dude. If you know him, making the transition between Greg's like all the love kind of in-person presence to putting him online and thinking about that. Patreon's been a great way for people to just say, you know, I love Greg and I hope he's doing great, and I'm going to send him $3 a month just because I can skip a Starbucks run and do that. And I think the power of Patreon is those small incremental support that you can just reach out and say, hey, you know, I don't need anything from you. I just want you to be okay. And that was kind of the way that we steered his work.
Here's another question. With such a crowded online teaching landscape these days, how do you go about reaching new students? It's a good question. I mean, I can speak a little bit about that in that, and I mentioned this when I was talking about what we do, you know, we actually talk on stage even. I mean, I know this is pre and post COVID stuff, but we talk on stage a lot about what we do. And after the show around the merch table. And I think a lot of people forget to do that. And, you know, it becomes a natural part of the conversation. There, you know, if you have a show with 100 people at it, there's a good chance there's a couple of teachers there. And if you tell an audience, I can't tell you how many school programs and opportunities we've had just because I briefly mentioned on stage that we do schoolwork. People make a beeline to come talk to you. And so that's how often we get most of our programming is straight from shows. But that's a little bit different than the online stuff. Any of you guys want to talk about getting new students now?
One of the things that we did early on was work with someone who does the data analytics. And Dave and I have talked about this. He's used the Facebook Manager, doing the analytics to see kind of what kind of promotion works and what doesn't. Learning that putting video content is going to be shared so much more than just text or even photo. Being warm and welcoming, having, again, the diversification, but also, you know, how you're just developing your reputation and how effective that is. I've been really fortunate to work with Peghead Nation because they do a lot of marketing. And so I'm part of their team of teachers. And the Freight and Salvage was also gearing up their education marketing right before this all shut down, and they've had to really scale back a lot of that. But online education has been the only thing that the live venue can support at this point. And I think also the fact that we were touring a lot. And again, like Ben said, I had this little shtick about, you know, if you have a banjo in your closet. And so many people came up and was like, I have a banjo in my closet. I'd love to learn to play. You know, here's a code for a free month. The free month have reeled a lot of people in. And then I'll also say, I mean, I've been so fortunate that it's the year of the banjo, it seems like. This confluence of the shutdown of people finally, it's been on their bucket list. And then I'll also say the proliferation of Black Lives Matter and those people like Rhiannon Giddens or Jake Blunt or now Amethyst Kia who play banjo and are bringing that into a whole other level of popularity and crossing genres and stuff that are piquing people's interest. And I've seen these waves come with Oh Brother and Mumford and Sons, and now this pandemic. It gives me heart that music stores are some of the thriving businesses, because a lot of people are playing music and biking and gardening and doing those things that are less consumptive because you can't get out.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's also, I think, for many of us, the convention scene. IBMA was one of the first big conventions that I said, I'm not just going to show up every once in a while. I'm going to be there every year. And so I would encourage as many of you as possible who play a string instrument to consider like the American String Teachers Association. ASTA.org is a very interesting group of educators. And a lot of times it's just that these worlds of dots are never really connected. And I think to Evie's point, the pandemic has really connected them. But I have to give, for this question, mad shout out to Dave for the visual merchandising edge that the Louisville Folk School has. I mean, I love the idea of a folk school, and I've always looked at the Louisville Folk School, but man, I see your stuff on Facebook every day, and it's really tasty. Whoever does your graphics is doing a great job, and I see your stuff every day. How are you doing that? That is total world domination through vibrating wooden boxes.
I love that. Yeah, so I mean, I studied art history in college, and I'm a very visual, aesthetic oriented fella. So, I like a cool logo was going to be essential. So, luckily, a friend of mine, when we were just getting started, built us a nice logo. And then I saw a friend's concert poster that looked just really awesome. And I was like, who is that artist? And so that just started from the beginning. It was like, okay, let's just hire artists and illustrators and designers to make a poster for each session. So we have 5 sessions a year, each 8 weeks long. And so I would just, we went through the first like 20 or 25 sessions where we, paid somebody to come up with an image, turned it into a poster, and usually they're cool with you using that illustration for other things later on down the line. And so I would just say, like, find an artist that you like, find somebody that designs posters or whatever. We have a good friend in Kathleen Lawley here in Louisville, Kentucky, who makes amazing artwork. She's had my Morning Jacket covers, album covers and stuff. And, I've a lot of the stuff that you've seen recently is stuff that she's designed. And so, yeah, just like find an artist that you like and pay them to make a design. And occasionally a local artist will even do a trade. You're like, oh, I want to learn some banjo. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Let's do that. But yeah, thank you for the props there. I think it's fun to come up with new designs, and I'm glad they're catching some eyeballs.
Yeah, I've been seeing them too. And there's, these days, in your browsers are so much more powerful than they used to be. I don't know about you guys, but if I need to make something look a little bit more attractive, Canva is free editing software that works in your browser, where you can add text to images, make them look better. And I don't consider myself an artist, but Canva has at least allowed me to not always have to look for somebody to do the little things. I'm a big advocate of paying good artists to do good work. So, but little things, Canva is great for that.
I would like to add just a little bit about the crowded online teaching and about effectiveness, coming back to effectiveness again. In some ways, I feel really fortunate that I didn't have a thorough music education growing up, because I don't take it for granted that these are things that people know. Music theory, even as applied to traditional music, can be a complete other language and very confusing. and people are really intimidated by understanding even what 1-4-5 means. And so I think that I came up learning in a traditional way, and then learned that information more as an adult, and especially as a teacher, just staying one step ahead of my students, but also being able to encourage people that this information is very accessible, giving them the small bites of it, so that, again, it's all calling in to, I feel like there are a lot of professional performers or people that have been learning music theory their whole life that really take it for granted that it's obvious. And that's very intimidating. And so any way that you can sort of unlearn or imagine what it's like to really not understand it and be a good educator, that's going to increase your teaching platform because you're being effective and you're welcoming.
That's great. I think we're close to wrapping it up here. I did want to point out, somebody brought up the Wernick method, and that's easy to find at drbanjo.com, drbanjo.com. Why don't we go around the circle here and let people know how they can contact us or find our stuff if they're interested in learning more. Annie?
Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to, Evie, I've seen you show up at a camp and bring your entire class and show up in the cafeteria while everybody's having lunch and have a little firebomb performance. So don't be afraid to be unpredictable. I think that's kind of one of my, don't be afraid to connect strange dots or be unpredictable, because that's what sets you apart from everybody else. And we did not get into bluegrass to be like everybody else. So you can find me at savagefiddler.com, and you can find my method there. And you can also find my classroom method for bluegrass jamming in traditional orchestra programs at free-strings.com.
Cool. Evie?
I apparently am the only Evie Ladin on the internet, which has been really helpful. Consider how you name your children. So evieladin.com is where you'd find me. And then I also encourage you to check out Crosspulse. That's the home for a lot of the intercultural work I do. And I don't know if I brought that up. I mentioned it a little bit, but mostly bringing this Appalachian-based music into collaboration, Ben, as you do, with a lot of different kinds of music. And I'll tell you, this is an aside, but a lot of people all over the world have said to me, I didn't know that there was a traditional music in America, because they are fed a steady diet of pop culture that comes out of this country. And so it's been really gratifying to be able to do that. So evieladin.com, crosspulse.com. I have a banjo teaching platform on Peghead Nation, and then group lessons through the Freight and Salvage, etc. You can find that all on my website. Dave.
Yeah.
Thanks. LouisvilleFolkSchool.org will get you to our homepage. I realize this is the first week of our spring classes, and hopefully the page is updated appropriately. I'm a one-man show when it comes to all that stuff, so sometimes it's out of date. Send me a little email, dave@LouisvilleFolkSchool.org, if you find something out of date on our website or have any other questions.
Cool. And I'm Ben Wright, henhouseprowlers.com and bluegrassambassadors.org. You can email me at ben@bluegrassambassadors.org. Guys, this has been amazing. Thank you all for doing this.